Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing all of the books that I read this year in 2021. So this year I got right back into loving reading. After receiving my cancer diagnosis around halfway through the year, I actually got a gift card to Indigo and I bought a couple books and really enjoyed those books, and then that fueled my reading passion again. I was a reader when I was younger, but during high school and university I just never really made the time for it. But I'm so glad that I re-found my love for books. I did read 18 books I have here. There might have been a couple other ones that I may have given away, I'm not too sure, but these are the ones that I remember reading. And I think even though that might not sound like a lot on YouTube, I think that that is a really great number for me, especially with all the treatments that I underwent this year. And if you have ever been through chemotherapy, you know that it can be really hard on your mind and your concentration and that kind of thing. That's what they deem chemo brain. So there were points during the year where I just couldn't focus on a book, and then there was points where I just couldn't put books down and I just kept reading and reading. And that was around the summertime. And then in radiation, I just wasn't really feeling well and I ended up in the hospital. But anyways, I did read a lot of books, and I thought I would share the books that I did read, what I thought about them, and recommend some of them to you if you're readers. But also if you're not readers, maybe in the new year that'll be something that maybe you want to get into. But anyways, without further ado, I do have quite a few books that I want to talk about, and I'm going to separate them into different categories based on genre. So I'll put the timestamps down below if there's a specific genre that you're interested in. But without further ado, let's start. So the first category is the shortest because I only read one nonfiction book this year. So before I was diagnosed, I was trying to read a lot of like self-help books and everything, but after that I got more into fiction for the escapism and all that kind of stuff. But I did read one nonfiction book. So I read The Art of Making Memories: How to Create and Remember Happy Moments by, I don't even know how to pronounce his name. He also wrote the little book of Haga. And there's another one that I have up in my bookshelf that I will be reading in the new year. But also right now I'm reading the little book of Huga as my non-fiction book. But I did read The Art of Making Memories and I think it was really good. I do think that I will pick this up again at a later date, but it was just something that I could take to chemo. It was a small book and it was something that it didn't really have chapters per se, like it had sections, but I didn't feel like I could read a couple of pages and I didn't feel like I was stopping midway through a really important concept, if that makes sense. So that's what I really liked about it. And also there are some like little graphics and pictures and like that kind of thing. So it was like really nice to look at, and there was some really good concepts about making memories and everything. I would give this probably a 3 stars. So I did enjoy this, and the reason why there's a bookmark is my mom is actually currently reading this book, but it was good and I do recommend it. The next category is sort of historical fiction. So the first book I read in this category, it's called The Home of Unwanted Girls by Joanna Goodman. So this story is set in the 1950s and it's about this girl who she meets a boy, and it's a first love kind of thing. They're 16 years old, but it's a bit of a forbidden love because she's English and he's French, and back in this time in Quebec, English and French were kind of at odds. So her father doesn't approve of them being together, so to separate them he sends her away. But then she finds out that she is pregnant because she's unwed and everything. She's kept hidden, nobody knows about the pregnancy, and she is forced to give the child up for adoption. But the adoption falls through. She's not made aware of this, and the father sends the baby to an orphanage where she is mistreated and everything, and it just follows the life of that child and then also the life of the parents of that child and of the mother trying to find that child. And it was actually a really good story. I think I would give this a 4 stars. It was a really nice story. And the only other book in this category is All the Light We Cannot See, which I was kindly sent by one of you guys, and I still haven't figured out who sent this to me, so if you did send this book to me, please let me know in the comments. But this book, I think I had a little bit too much of a high expectation going into this. I know lots of people love this book, but I don't know, it just didn't really do it for me. It was a good story and I think I would give it 3 stars, but I just found the timeline especially was a little hard to follow, with it jumping back and forth between the years and the months and all that kind of thing. But definitely I think an important story to be told, so yeah, I would give this a 3 stars. So the next category I would say is kind of contemporary vibe. So I do have 4 books in this category. So this first one is called Anna and the French Kiss by Stephanie Perkins. So this is a young adult contemporary romance, and it's about this girl named Anna. She's forced to move to Paris for boarding school for her last year of high school, and she doesn't want to leave her friends or anything. But she ends up in Paris and she meets this boy, and he's in a relationship already. So she's trying to convince herself that she's not in love with him, but as you may probably can infer that she is in love with him, and it's just basically their story in Paris. And I did start reading this and then I had to put it down, and then I picked it back up, and I think maybe because of the age of the characters I just found them like really annoying. And I think the main character, she complained a lot, and there was just basically the romance was all miscommunication, and there was some cute scenes, but I just didn't really enjoy this that much. But I think also because of the age it is, but I think I would give this 2.5 stars. And the next book in this category is Where the Crawdad Sings by Delia Owens. This was that book that I read that I got with the gift card that brought me back into reading and reminded me of my love of reading. So this follows a girl this is set in the 60s, and it's in a small town, and there's a girl that the whole town calls her the Marsh Girl, and she was basically abandoned by her family, and she's living in the marsh fending for herself, and everybody just ignores her, thinks that she's weird, and she's basically isolated with the exception of a few kind people. But then she becomes a suspect in a murder case, and because of the whole town's prejudice and everything. And it's just a really nice story about not judging somebody by their looks, or not judging a book by its cover. And this was a really great story, and I can see why it is a bestseller. And at first I gave this, I think, a 4 star because I wasn't really sure my rating system and I didn't really have like a lot to compare it to, but I would change this to a 5 star. It was a great book and one of my top 3 of this year. And then following that, I read The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and this also was one of my top 3 books of the year. So I read this after I read Where the Crawdads Sing. So this one is about this famous Hollywood actress, Evelyn Hugo, and Monique is a reporter, and she gets tasked to go interview Evelyn, and Evelyn hires her to basically write her memoir of her life. And Evelyn has had 7 marriages, but nobody really knows the ins and outs of what happened in each of the marriages. So the whole book goes through, she recounts her marriages and what happened in between that. And yeah, like I said, Monique is tasked with writing her memoir. Exclusive access, nobody has had this much privilege to her personal life. Monique also doesn't really understand why is she granted this opportunity, because she'll make millions with writing this memoir. So it's a really good story about looks can be deceiving. Even if somebody looks truly happy or that they have all the fame, fortune in the world, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're happy. Yeah, it was just a really well-written book, and I found myself, same with the last book I mentioned, I was thinking about this book even after I read it, so I would give this one a 5 stars. And the last book in this category is another one by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and this one is called Maybe in Another Life. Now this one I think is one of Taylor Jenkins Reid's first novels, I believe. She did definitely write this before The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. And as I wouldn't say it's as deep as The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, this one is still really, really good. And I actually read this one very quickly. So this one follows a 29-year-old named Hannah, and she is basically lost in life. She's traveled to different countries, had so many different jobs, and she still doesn't know who she is. So she ends up returning home, and she has this best friend, and they go out to the bar and they meet up with her ex-boyfriend from high school. And after the night is over, she has to decide whether she wants to go home with her best friend or she wants to go home with her high school boyfriend. And the whole book explores the two different decisions, if she went home with the best friend and if she went home with her ex-boyfriend. This book really gets you thinking about the choices that you make in life, and so I really enjoyed this book. I actually got this, it's a pretty beat up copy, but I actually got this at one of the little free libraries, and I thought, wow, that is awesome. I had already read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I definitely wanted to read more of Taylor Jenkins Reid's books. So I haven't heard a lot of people talking about this one, but this one is definitely a great one, and I think I would give this one 4.5 stars. So the next category is sci-fi / fantasy. So the first book is Illuminae by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. So this is part of a trilogy, and this is the first book. And what drew me to the book was it has all different, it's a multimedia format book, so there's like files and interview scripts and like all that kind of stuff, emails, black pages. And so that's what drew me into the book. But I have to be honest, this book, I've tried to read this book 2 or 3 times, and I finally this year I read the full thing. And it's a pretty big book, but it's a bit faster to read because some of the pages are literally like this. But this basically is a sci-fi that follows these two main characters, well, the main character, so Katie and Ezra. So they're teenagers, and at the beginning of the book they break up, but the day that they break up, it's basically the end of their world. They're on like this like other planet, and all the inhabitants of this planet, they are all separated onto these 3 different ships, and I forget who's after them. There's like some evil corporation coming after them, but Katie and Ezra get split up into the different ships, and it's basically going through their story, how they are saving these ships from being taken down by this evil corporation, that kind of thing. It wasn't my favorite book, but I do have the second book, and I found that at a second-hand bookstore, so if I can find the third one, I will finish the trilogy just because I think it's a really cool format. But it was also a little bit hard to follow with the different ships and that kind of thing. So I would give this probably 2.5 stars maybe. And then I finally read Twilight by Stephenie Meyers. So I have seen all of the movies, and this is another one of those books that I've had for such a long time, and when I was younger I tried to read this quite a few times, but I just couldn't get through it. So I finally decided I want to read the Twilight series. So I ended up reading Twilight, and I did enjoy it. It's quite lengthy, but I did enjoy it. I just think at the age that I am now, I start to get annoyed with the main character, Bella. If you don't know what Twilight is about, it's about this girl, her name's Bella. She moves to this small town and she meets this boy. His name is Edward. He's in a family of vampires and nobody knows about them. And it's basically goes along the journey of them. It's like one of those books where there's like an evil person, an evil vampire or whatever, and there's werewolves involved and all that kind of thing. I think most people know what Twilight's about, but I find the older that I'm getting, the more I get frustrated with characters like Bella. And I started reading New Moon, and I'm like halfway through it, but I had to put it down because Bella was just annoying me so much. She's like one of those characters that she like literally meets Edward 5 minutes ago and he's the love of her life and she can't breathe without him. And I'm thinking, girl, you breathed without him before you knew him. So it's still like a fun series to read, and I will eventually get to those ones, but I think I would give this, I feel like I have to give this like a 3-star because it was enjoyable. It's just some of those parts are a bit cringe. And then I also read this book. I got this from a little free library. It's called The Vampire Stalker, and this is by Alison Van Diepen. So this actually used to be a library book. This is a Canadian author, and this story follows the main character, what's her name? Amy, and she is obsessed with this book series about vampires, a vampire slayer. And she's like in love with this like fictional character who slays evil vampires. But in this book, she finds out that the stories that she thinks are fictional, they are actually real, and the whole world that this author built actually does exist. And the two worlds come together, and one of the evil vampires gets loose into the human world and is attacking people, and she ends up having to help this vampire slayer that she is in love with try and track down this vampire before he wreaks any more havoc. I definitely think this is young adult, and I can definitely tell that it is young adult because, again, there was a lot of like cringy moments, but it was also like a really cute story to read, very fast to read. So I think I would give this maybe 3 stars just because I like really enjoyed getting through it, and even though it wasn't too deep, it still was pretty good. And the next book is called Graceling by Christine Kashore. So this is part of a series, and this follows Katza, and she has this special ability where she can kill men with her bare hands. She's called a Graceling, so that's her gift. So anyways, she all her life has been forced to work for the king as warrior, sort of slayer, and forced to do all these things for him. But she meets, there's like a few different kingdoms. There's 7 different kingdoms, and she meets a prince from one of the kingdoms because she rescues his grandfather, and he's come to look for his grandfather, and she basically goes on a quest with him to find out why his grandfather was kidnapped, who's doing all of these really bad things. And yes, there's a bit of romance in there, adventure, magic, all that kind of stuff. I would have liked there to be a little bit more romance. I think it was a bit lacking, and sometimes I found the main character a little bit annoying, but other than that, I think it was pretty good, and if I can find the other books in this series, I will probably continue. But it's a companion to 2 other books. So it's not, I've heard that you don't have to read it in a specific order, but there's a recommended order, and I think this one was the first recommended. So if I can find the other ones, then I will read the rest, but I would give this maybe a 3-star. And the next book that I read is Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nagan, and I just recently finished this last week, and this was really good. One of my lovely subscribers actually sent this to me, and this follows this girl named Lay, and it's in this world where there's 3 different classes. So there's the paper class where you're all human. There's the steel class, which you're half human, half demon, so you have like animal parts. And then there's the moon class, they're full demon, and they're like the highest level class. So the whole kingdom is run by this demon king, and every year the paper class offer up their daughters to be these paper girls. So it's kind of like a bachelor situation, but much worse. They're basically forced to do whatever the king wants, and the king can do whatever he wants to them, and that's basically their role. So Lay, because she has very pretty eyes, they hunt her out, and she becomes one of the paper girls, and it follows her story as being a paper girl. I won't give too much away, but it's basically, I would compare it to the Hunger Games in the sense of the different classes, and how the lowest class is basically treated like dirt, and they are made an example of, and there's also some rebellion and everything. And this was actually a really good book. There's a female-female romance, and yes, I really enjoyed this, and I really enjoyed the plot as well. So there is one other book to this, so I will have to get to that in the new year. But yes, I really enjoyed this, and I would give this a 4.5 stars. And this was my most recent book, so it's The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. Now, this was my favorite book of the year, and I just finished it today, and it was the first book that I actually annotated. You can see my page flags. I loved this book. This was such a heartwarming story, and so one of the praise quotes, like at the beginning of the book, explains this perfectly well, like what it is. It says, "Sweet, comforting, and kind, this book is very close to perfect. The House in the Cerulean Sea is a work of classic children's literature written for adults and children alike with the perspective and delicacy of the modern day. I cannot recommend it highly enough." So this book follows Linus Baker, who is a social worker who works for the department in charge of magical youth. So he basically goes around to these orphanages that have these children with special powers and gifts. They're different from everyone else, they're magical, and he deems if they are safe homes for these children. So he is tasked by extremely upper management, his bosses, to go to this house in the Cerulean Sea on this island because they believe that this house with this orphanage has very dangerous children that could potentially lead to the end of the world, and they want his most honest and thorough investigation to see if this house needs to be shut down. And T.J. Klune writes characters so well, and I've found that I really need to connect to characters to really enjoy a book, and I felt like I could really connect to the characters. And there's this one little boy, his name's Chauncey. I could adopt him if he was real. He is so cute. All he wants to be in life is a bellhop, and I just think that is adorable. So this book had me smiling from ear to ear. I have so many tabs of different moments that I loved, different moments that I laughed at, and I couldn't recommend this book enough. And actually, T.J. Klune, he just came out with another book. It's called Under the Whispering Door, so I really want to get to that eventually. It sounds like a really great book as well. Favorite book of the year, 5 out of 5 stars. So the last category is thriller mystery sort of category. So I read 5 thriller mystery books. So the first one I want to talk about is The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins. So this is actually a movie they made it into, but it's about this girl Rachel, and she is recently divorced and kind of lost, and she takes this train to work every day, and she looks out the window and it always passes this street where this what seemingly perfect happy couple live at this house, and she fantasizes what their names are, what their life's like. And then one day she notices that hasn't seen the woman in a long time, so she goes to investigate, and it's just basically about what happened to this woman. She goes missing and everything, and Rachel is kind of trying to investigate what happened. I don't want to give too much away if you're interested in reading this, but I did find this book was a little bit slow, and also the main character was a little bit annoying at times. Like, there was things that she would do that I was like, why are you doing that? You're gonna get in so much trouble. But there was a really good twist at the ending that I wasn't expecting, and I like that in books when you don't expect what's going to happen. So for that reason, I'll give this a 3 star, but it wasn't my favorite book. And I also read Into the Water by Paula Hawkins. So I picked this up because I read the synopsis, and it's a really cool concept. So it's basically about this town where all of these women have died at this river that runs through the town, and it's kind of a mystery why the women specifically pick this spot and what happens to them. And basically it's about this one character. She recently died, but they don't think that it was a suicide because she just wasn't suicidal and nobody seen the signs, so it's like a mystery. So they're trying to figure out what happened to her, what has happened to some of the previous women. Like I said, I loved the premise of this book and it sounded very intriguing, and I think the first half I was pretty hooked, but the ending I guessed what happened and it was kind of obvious. And then the other thing that I found really confusing and kind of took away from the story was there was a lot of perspectives and a lot of different characters, and it was kind of hard sometimes to keep up with who everybody was. For that reason, I think I would give this a 2.5 stars, just because the ending was very disappointing, because like I said, I guessed it and it was predictable. And the next book, I read The Silent Patient by Alex. I don't even know how to say his last name, but this book had a lot of hype this year, and for good reason. This was actually a really good book. This one is about this psychotherapist. His name is Theo. And he goes to work at this psychiatric hospital that has this patient. Her name is Alicia. And Alicia's story, she murdered her husband and nobody knows what happened, because ever since the murder, she hasn't spoken a word. So Theo's determined to get her to speak, and that's why he goes to work there. And I did not guess the twist in this. There was a huge twist, like my jaw just like dropped, like I wasn't expecting it, and I think that's what made the book so good. I really enjoyed the twist of this, and I read this really quickly, so I would give this one a 4 stars. And the next book I read was Verity by Colleen Hoover. So this was my first Colleen Hoover book, and this is a psychological thriller / romance, and it follows the main character Loan, and she's a struggling author, and she gets tasked by a publisher to go to this famous author's house and finish writing the books in her very popular series, because she's unable to finish it because of an accident that she had. And she stays at this woman's house with her husband and their son, and she gets to know the husband. And while she's trying to write these last books, she finds a disturbing unfinished autobiography that was written by this author, and the author's name is Verity. And she doesn't know what to do with this, and there's some weird things that are happening and a lot of unanswered questions throughout this book. And this was a really good book. There are a lot of trigger warnings, so just be aware of that. But the ending, oh my goodness, there was such a big twist at the ending, and it's one of those books where it leaves you like feeling very uneasy and like not even knowing what's real, what's not, what to believe. And yeah, this was my first Colleen Hoover book, so I definitely want to read more of her books in the future. So I think I'd give this 4.5 stars because it was very gripping. And the last book that I'm going to talk about today is also a thriller, and this is called Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. And this was also sent to me by one of my lovely subscribers. And this one is about Adam and Amelia, and they're working on their marriage. Their marriage is basically falling apart, and Amelia gets an email saying that she won this exclusive vacation in Scotland, and they go to this cabin to get away and hopefully save their marriage. But a lot of weird things are happening as they arrive for this vacation, and we soon realize that there's someone that doesn't want them to be happy. I think what's also really cool and what drew me to this book is the husband, Adam. He has face blindness, so he can see but he doesn't recognize anybody. So if he saw someone he knew at the supermarket, he wouldn't be able to tell that that was that person unless they came up to him and spoke to him and told him who they were. So I thought that was a really cool concept, and I had never heard of a book that explored that. So this one was really good, and it was a really great page turner. I'd give this 4.5 stars, and my mom also read this and my nanny also read this, and they both really enjoyed it as well. So that is all the books that I read this year, and I'm hoping to read lots more books in the coming new year. And I want to know, what was your favorite book that you read this year, or what's a book that you're looking forward to reading next year? I'd love to know in the comments down below. I hope you all are having a restful and relaxing end of your year. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like, and also subscribe to my channel if you're not already. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.